vaccine safety and freedom of choice. You've probably been concerned about this for a while, but you haven't seen anything yet. Hi, this is Dr. Mercola, helping you take control of your health. And today I am joined by Barbara Loe Fisher, who has been on this program many times before and is the co-founder of the National Vaccine Information Center. And she has some incredible, exciting information to share today. And it's going to be a very interesting dialogue. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today from all the way from Virginia.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me again. I always enjoy our conversations.
So can you tell us the latest, because it's been a challenge with this vaccine safety and freedom of choice issue in this country, but it's getting worse. It's going international.
It is definitely going international. You know, the problem is that the global mass vaccination infrastructure is truly starting to bring out the hammer and down on the people. Mm-hmm. We have governments that have made business deals with the pharmaceutical companies, and the Bill Gates Foundation is also very much involved. And what we've seen in the last few years is a very orchestrated attack on laws that allow people to have choice, vaccine laws. In our country, we've seen since 2015 with the Disneyland measles outbreak, an orchestrated attempt to eliminate vaccine exemptions in this country. However, the people have responded since 2015. And we, in this country at least, we have seen no loss of vaccine exemptions since 2015, when they took the personal belief exemption from California and the philosophical from Vermont. Yeah,
that's the good news. There is some good news in this. We don't want to always be crying the sky is falling. The good news is, as you're about to explain, that we've been successful the last 2 years.
We have in this country, because this has been going on in our country for a long time. We've had some of the most restrictive and oppressive vaccine laws. We do have exemptions in the laws, and that's what they want to eliminate. They want to eliminate all choice. So we have organized, and through the NVIC advocacy portal, which people can sign onto, we've kept people informed by monitoring all the bills in the states, and we have been able to generate enough opposition to not lose, despite more than 180 bills this last legislative session, trying to add more vaccine mandates, trying to monitor vaccine status of everyone, trying to restrict or eliminate exemptions. We defeated all of those bad vaccine bills. And the only bill that passed was a meningococcal vaccine mandate in Indiana for college students. This is an incredible accomplishment, but the heat is on, and we're going to see another mass attempt in 2018 to take away exemptions. What's happened in the rest of the world? Australia now, if you don't get all the government mandated vaccines there, you lose your child benefits. They support children there with monetary support, and the children are no longer going to be able to get that support, and they're not going to be able to go to school. In Italy, we have seen 10 vaccines added to the mandates there. They didn't have mandates there, and they've added 10 vaccines at once. It was going to be 12 vaccines. They brought it back to 10. But there, you cannot get your child in school, or they're going to be segregated into a small classroom of the children who aren't vaccinated, and the parents fined $500 or more for not vaccinating their children.
Per day.
I don't know per day. I just know that there's a lot of money involved. And in France, they're also threatening to add more vaccine mandates. And so there's sort of this global push to take away all vaccine exemptions. And I think people need to take it seriously, because they're not going to stop. Why? Because it's a $27 billion business right now in the global vaccine market. The projection is $55 billion by 2021 and $70 billion by 2024, which means they double the market within 8 years. So, you know, it's a serious situation. Two of the big four companies are Pfizer and Merck, which are US companies, GlaxoSmithKline, which is a UK company, and then there's Sanofi Pasteur, France. They have the lion's share of the market, and they clearly have all gotten together, and they've made deals with governments around the world. So right now, in this country, it's no shots, no school. It's no shots, no medical care. because there are pediatricians who are refusing to provide medical care to children who have not gotten all the government recommended vaccines, and then there's no shots, no job for healthcare workers. I predict that what we're going to see is no shots, no driver's license, no shots, no passport, no shots, no ability to get into, for example, a stadium to watch a football game. Anywhere that you go out in public, you're going to have to prove that you've had the vaccines. That's what I think is going to happen if we don't hold the line here.
And what leads you to believe that it's going to be worse next year, 2018?
I believe that we had a Disneyland outbreak in 2015 that they reported, which was also highly orchestrated.
Yeah, I was going to say it was probably orchestrated. So do you believe there's going to anticipate that there's going to be another orchestrated event?
I do.
That triggers this suppression?
Yeah. I think 2018, at latest 2019. Okay. But I think that they are rushing now. Why are they rushing to try to put the squeeze on people? Because they know that people are waking up. There were massive, tens of thousands of people demonstrated in Italy this last year. They demonstrated in Rome, in Florence, in Verona. This past September, they demonstrated in Venice. The people are standing up, and they know that they're in trouble if they don't make the laws restrictive so that people can't function in society unless they have all the government recommended vaccines. So
yeah, it's a sad projection, but very likely, and as long as we have this information, be forewarned. But the central issue here, though, is it's not just about vaccines. I mean, that's what we're talking about, and the concern is there, but it's actually a far broader issue. And it's about the process that they're undergoing to achieve their means, which is essentially giving them unlimited power.
Yes.
So can you expand on that?
Well, what it is, and I called it in 2015, I called it the vaccine culture war. And truly, I believe that's what it is. The vaccination issue is at the center of a larger culture war. And the outcome of this culture war, which is an attack on autonomy, on privacy, on freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and freedom of religion. This culture war and the outcome of it will determine how we're going to live, not just in this country, but around the world in the 21st century. And if the governments and the big corporations, which have gotten together financially, if they continue down this path where they limit individual freedom, we're going to have a situation that's very much reminiscent of Huxley's Brave New World, Orwell's 1984. You look at the apocalyptic visions that are coming out of Hollywood, which is often entertainment and literature is a sort of a
harbinger?
Yes, they sense something. And you see a lot of apocalyptic type movies coming out. People can sense that there's something that's not right, and they're anxious. I mean, you can feel this sort of collective angst, not just in this country, but around the world, particularly in developed countries where there's a high education status. We've seen the media, which seems to be increasingly controlled by governments and by large institutions, wealthy institutions, come down on the idea of anyone dissenting from what is considered to be politically correct. Sort of this groupthink type of idea that you cannot dissent from what you're supposed to be believing and how you're supposed to act. And certainly the holistic healthcare movement, which you've been a pioneer in, is also at the center of this. They do not want anyone to be able to take control of their health, because this would diminish the profit making of the corporations that are very wed to, the medical model now is very wed to drugs and vaccines and use of products that really have a lot of serious side effects. And they don't want to have people talk about that. So this sort of attack on anyone who thinks differently, particularly people who are educated, there's a great attack on educated people. and who think, for example, who do their own research and make decisions different from what the government says on vaccination. So it's a serious issue, but you're right. It's this vaccine freedom issue is part of a larger issue that's going on in our country and around the world.
Yes, indeed. And part of the justification for that, or well, actually, let's go down a different route, is that what allows this is there's this massive collusion, and it really is truly collusion of large international or multinational corporations in the government. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they've got virtually almost unlimited resources, and that allows them to do very effective lobbying and put their planted people within very targeted portions of the federal regulatory controls.
Yes.
That really establish the rules and regulations.
Yes.
And because of that, it's really a form of fascism, where the corporations are controlling the government. They're really, the government's just sort of a front for them and allows them to effectively implement their means. And it seems, from my cursory review of history, to be a common occurrence in most nations. You know, when they first started out, like the United States did, there was some pretty high idealistic standards they had, but eventually they became corrupted over time.
Yes. Well, you know, I sat many years ago on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee that looks at new vaccines coming through the FDA. I was a consumer representative. And that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And there still were some regulations in place, but I could see the slow erosion of those standards, the lowering of the standards that the pharmaceutical companies have to meet to prove safety and effectiveness of their vaccines. And in the last decade, it's just gotten worse. And mm-hmm. in December of 2016, when Congress passed almost unanimously the 21st Century Cures Act, which was a huge assault on FDA licensing regulations, I knew that all of the vaccines that are being in the research pipeline, genetically engineered vaccines that are going to profoundly change the way our immune systems function. They're going to change our DNA. They're going to, in my opinion, compromise the biological integrity of the human race. This is a serious issue when you have almost no standards in place to make sure that the product, these very different types of vaccines that are being developed with novel adjuvants that hyperstimulate the immune system, and to not have proper regulations in place is a tragedy. Mm-hmm. For those who want to use all the government recommended vaccines, it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy for those who cannot withstand the process of vaccination because of genetic, epigenetic, and environmental risk reasons. The Institute of Medicine has acknowledged that there is individual susceptibility. And the problem is they haven't done the research to find out who the high-risk people are. So this mandatory one-size-fits-all approach to vaccination, I have always said, is a de facto state-sanctioned selection of the genetically and biologically vulnerable for sacrifice. That is an immoral policy. It should not stand in any government in any country. And yet we have that. And we see in California, since SB 277, we now this year see, they promised Californians that there would be flexible medical exemption if they took away the religious and philosophical exemptions. What are they doing now?
The precise opposite.
Now they're hunting down doctors who are trying to give these children, these vulnerable children, medical exemptions. And they're
legitimate, not...
Well, legitimate and flexible medical exemptions. For example, if a child has had a vaccine reaction or has had a regression after vaccination, but the CDC doesn't acknowledge that as a medical reason, because the CDC has squeezed down the reasons for a medical exemption so that 99.99% of people don't qualify. So if you insist that doctors take away their professional judgment and insist that they conform to government policy, nobody gets a medical exemption. What is that? That's tyranny. That is fascism. When you can't even have a doctor exempt a child they believe is at risk, That is tyranny. That is taking away a basic freedom, the right to life, the right to autonomy. It's a violation of informed consent rights. Informed consent has been defined as a human right since 1947 after the doctor's trial at Nuremberg. This is a very serious assault on basic human rights. And so people have got to get involved.
Yeah.
And they've got to talk to their legislators and say, we will not have these kinds of laws, not in America.
Yeah, and the justification at Nuremberg, as is the justification today, is the classic for the greater good.
Yes.
So why don't you expand on that, because that's an important concept.
It is a very important concept. What at the doctor's trial at Nuremberg, what the tribunal said was, the state or science, the medical community cannot sacrifice some people for the rest. That the utilitarianism, which is what this really is, the utilitarian philosophy says, for the greater happiness of the majority, a minority can be sacrificed. And the Nuremberg Tribunal said this is not a moral policy. So, informed consent to medical risk-taking is a human right, and vaccines carry risks that can be greater for some people. So to force everyone, particularly when they don't know who those people are, that's utilitarianism, and that should not be allowed to buttress or to anchor public health policy. That's inhumane. So I think that if people, immoral, cruel, inhuman to the last degree, the 1905 Supreme Court decision, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which set in stone in this country utilitarianism as a public health, anchor of public health, said that Jacobson, who thought he would be, he thought he was genetically predisposed to having reactions to smallpox vaccine. They said, doesn't matter. You have to get vaccinated. The state has the right to tell everyone they must get vaccinated, no exceptions. So what did the government do with that smallpox vaccine decision? They decided to apply it to every single vaccine that the pharmaceutical companies manufacture for children. So it's not just smallpox vaccine that has been mandated. Where they went on to all the rest of the vaccines, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, measles, mumps, rubella, pneumococcal, meningococcal, influenza. All of the vaccines now are supposed to adhere to the smallpox model that was decided in Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Who gave them the right? Who gives anyone the right to decide what is going to happen to someone when they get injected with a vaccine that they have no choice? You know, my family could be wiped out because we have autoimmunity in my family. We are vulnerable. We have severe allergies. My father had to wear a penicillin bracelet. My mother died of lupus. What they're doing is they're going to wipe out whole families if they continue to force people to use all the vaccines that the drug companies produce. I don't know how you feel. You're a physician, and I know you went through medical school, and you know how you're taught to believe a certain way. I see the medical profession as being a key in stopping this from going any further. How do you think they can do that?
Well, I don't hold any hope for the medical profession. None. Zero. And there's reasons for that. It's because having gone through school, I sort of was the last generation, I believe, that was able to successfully graduate, that didn't come from a wealthy family, that didn't graduate with a large, enormous bill, probably upwards, well, of $250,000 in debt. And when you're in debt, of course, you become an indentured servant. It really limits your freedom of choice of opportunities and actions. Essentially become employees. And as employees, you don't have any autonomy. You have to do what your boss is telling you to do. So they may object, but they'll lose their job if they object. So I don't see any hope for that at all. I think the really hope is in the those of you who are watching this to spread the message, to educate the public. And we are being successful. As you mentioned, we've been able to stop these things. That's great. And I want to tangent off to the point that, as we mentioned earlier, this is a much broader issue than vaccines. It's not just vaccines. It's this whole corporate takeover. And because of it, so it's these large corporations who are controlling the game, who are making these regulations. You said, how do they think they got the right? They got the right because corporations came in, made lots of money, and changed the government. That's how they got the right. So it's the revenues they generated that allowed them to do this. So, and I want to expand now into some of the ways that they're doing this to give people a heads up so that we can circumvent this, because we've been effective. No question we've been effective, thanks to your leadership in this area, at least in vaccines. People know about it, and it is really, as I reflect back on the exemption laws in California, I mean, it's these most educated communities in the entire United States who carefully studied this come to their conclusions. They were just shut down because of this corporate takeover. So, you know, the people getting it, they're getting it in increasing numbers, but their ability to get that is literally being silenced.
Yes.
And it's being silenced through some very large corporations, 3 specifically: Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Google probably being the most pernicious, but Facebook not far behind. And they do that by labeling things as fake news and only coming up with the option that when you search for an answer, there should only be one answer. Forget the hell of a controversy or 2 sides to a story. There's only one answer. And they're penalizing sites that tell the truth. So maybe you can expand that, because you've got some, again, this is a philosophical debate. This is not about vaccines. It is far broader an issue.
It's ideology.
Yes.
It's about power and money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fight about whether the individual is going to have any control over their life, what they eat, the air they breathe, the water they drink, what is put into their bodies. And so it's about control and it's about money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which makes sense if you just think about it. It's not shocking information.
And I think what's really disturbing, more and more disturbing, is that the media appears to be more controlled in this century than it was in the 20th century. Because I've bridged that. I started this work in 1982. So I've had 35 years to look at what has happened over more than 3 decades.
And we've had very credible journalists speak to that point, Cheryl Atkinson being the primary one.
Back in the 80s and 90s, the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, even CNN, they would take, they had what I called old-fashioned journalism. And
True investigative journalists.
That's right. And they really wanted to, there were these investigative journalists that really wanted to find out the truth. And so they
Imagine that.
The truth. They wanted to know the truth. And so they would interview everyone in the issue. And often I would be interviewed, and some doctors who were dissenters. There were very few, but there were some that were dissenting back then about this one-size-fits-all government policy. And then they would actually show the array of opinions about it. And now, no, saluting smartly, just like the doctors are saluting smartly to the government policy. And they are, like you say, it should only be one answer. Any other answer is a threat to the public health.
And this isn't just some wild speculation.
No,
because
we all know.
You've been doing this for over 30 years, and you've been a major voice in the national media, and you've had the media come to you regularly. So why don't you tell us your experiences, what's happened recently, which is a direct reflection of what your statement is with respect to the suppression of the media, or the increased control of the media.
Well, how I know without a shadow of a doubt that this is true is, like I say, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, the calls were still coming into NVIC. Just tell us your side. Now,
from the media.
From the media.
The national
mainstream media.
Yeah, mainstream
yes,
national
the
media, right.
mainstream media. I mean, I've debated more doctors on television than any American.
Than most Americans combined, probably. Well,
because, you know, and I represented the parents who had experienced this. And I call it the educated consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So they slowly in around 2006, I noticed that it started to stop, and yet the media hype about you got to get a flu vaccine, you've got to, you know, all this. Well, it got dwindled down. Now in 2009 with the swine flu outbreak, they kind of came back to ask our opinion. But the message went out from very important doctors, vaccine developers, professors of medicine and law,
public health authorities,
in public health authorities, that the reason that we're in this situation where people are questioning vaccines is because you're talking to NVIC and to other people who disagree with government policy. So we need to stop that. That word went out. I mean, they said it in the mainstream media, and slowly the media stopped calling. Now, what happened in 2015?
Mm-hmm.
The measles outbreak at Disneyland. So I haven't been being called. All of a sudden, I was drinking from a fire hose, really, for weeks, at least 2 weeks. I would get up in the morning and it was nonstop media calls coming in from all over the world, and especially from every mainstream outlet here.
This is after the measles outbreak.
After in January, February 2015. Now I'm going, what's up?
And there was nothing for years before that.
Right. What's up? What's going on?
Yeah.
I knew that a media advisory had been put out by some PR firm working for the companies or government, because the government hires, I mean, they spend millions of dollars every year. They've hired companies, PR companies and advertising companies to push out the government policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this is a setup of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
There, you know, and I went ahead and did my interviews like I always do. And then it was like they got through that cycle. They took away the exemption from California. They took away the philosophical from Vermont, and they turned it off. Boom. Silence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty much been silent since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So see, I know that there is control at a very high level.
Mm-hmm.
And the media, unfortunately, because there's only a few communications companies now who own the global media.
I think it's like 6 that own 85% of the
right.
media.
And that's not the way it was in the 20th century. So here we are with a controlled media. We have corporate with their at the table with government, like at the CDC and at the FDA and NIH. I mean, there's business partnerships at NIH with the drug companies and the NIH researchers. So who's minding the public interest? Where is the oversight? Congress. They directed these public-private partnerships. They passed the 21st Century Cures Act. They haven't monitored and given any oversight on the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 that at least gave partial liability protection to pharma, completely protected the doctors from lawsuits if vaccine injuries occur. And then the Supreme Court came in 2011, took away remaining liability from the companies. So you have a situation in America where you've got forced vaccination, you've got almost no medical exemptions, a threat to the other exemptions, religious and conscience.
That you've been holding the fort.
That we've been holding the line on so far.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got no liability on the part of anybody involved in the vaccination process. So when somebody gets hurt, they're on their own, because 2 out of 3 people are turned away from the federal vaccine injury compensation program. Why? Because the DHHS and Justice do not want to admit how many people are being harmed by vaccines. They consider every award in that compensation program to be an admission that vaccines can do that.
But even so, that's $8 billion, $7 billion.
$3.7 billion. Okay. So we're nearing $4 billion of compensation. But that's only a tip of the iceberg, because he turned most people away.
Yeah, well over 95%.
They turned 2/3 away.
2/3?
Yeah.
Okay. Thought it was so higher.
Yeah. And almost no child is being compensated. They're compensating adults who are injured by flu vaccine, but they don't want to admit that children are being hurt.
Yeah, but they have been. I mean, it's indisputable. It's non-debatable. The fact is they are hurt, and they accept that when push comes to shove, and their justification is for the greater good.
Well, you know, I think back in the 20th century, I went to school in the 50s and in the 60s. I mean, I knew like one child who had asthma. I knew one child who had diabetes. There were no children with autism. There were very few learning disabled children. There weren't special education classrooms for these children. And now we have 1 in 6 child in this country, 1 in 6 learning disabled, 1 in 9 with asthma, 1 in 10 with ADHD, 1 in 10 that has been diagnosed with a mental disorder, depression, etc. We have 1 in 50 with autism, and we have 1 in 400 with diabetes. We have children who are chronically inflamed, who are never well.
Yeah. Yeah, but let me just interject here, because I want to take the broader perspective. And vaccines clearly, I believe, are a contributing factor. But there are others.
Yes, there
like
are.
Like the atrocious diets we eat, the ones that are loaded with glyphosate, and the pernicious exposure to the pervasive EMF toxins, which is just exponentially increasing.
Right.
So when you combine those all together, it results in the numbers that you're suggesting. And of course, other toxins that are in the environment. But
no, I totally agree with you.
So it's not just vaccines, but it doesn't certainly help the situation.
Not when you're giving the first vaccine at 12 hours of age in the newborn nursery, a hepatitis B shot.
Which there's no justification for. There is just, it's an irrational decision. I mean, there's just no medical, logical, rational justification to do that.
Not when you don't know the immune status of the child, not when hepatitis B has always been a very low incidence of hepatitis B in this country, even in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1991, they put that policy in place for all newborns, but you had less than 0.5% of women who were infected with hepatitis B, mothers. No,
And you could easily screen them prior to, do a blood test. If the mother's infected, then maybe consider the shot, but that's still, it's a 200-fold decrease in the amount of injections you're giving.
Absolutely, but it was a Merck vaccine, and I remember when I was at the CDC in 1985 with a mother who had had a child die after DPT vaccine. We were reporting the death there at the meeting in Atlanta, and this is when nobody was going to those meetings. 1985, there was no internet or cell phones. Okay, so the manufacturer rep gets up and says to the CDC, and this is why they own it. He said, look, to the CDC officials, if you can't get the high-risk groups to take this vaccine that we poured all this research and development into, you're just going to have to pass a law to shoot it in the arms of every high school kid in the country, because we are not going to have an orphan drug on our hands.
Yeah.
And instead, they decided to shoot it into the arms or the legs of every newborn as soon as they're born in this country.
And that was a Merck vaccine. And after that, I think early 2000s, Julie Gerberding was the head of the CDC. She's a physician. And the moment after she left the head of the CDC, she shifted to, and remains to this day, the head of the vaccine division for Merck. So that is the classic illustration of the revolving door between industry and the federal regulatory agencies, or in this case, public health, not a regulatory agency. But it is a regulatory agency because they're making the recommendations, and whatever the recommendations they have, it's enforced throughout the rest of the culture. Yeah. Because the CDC said it was safe, or recommended it, advised it, and it's, when you have the former head of the CDC. It's just great, and it goes the door goes in both directions. So they've got people who were part of Merck or any of the vaccine industry going straight into the CDC.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I don't know what's going to happen in the rest of this culture war that's going on right now. Very political, ideological culture war. But I do know on the vaccine issue that the one thing that we can do is that because vaccine laws are state laws in this country, because we have two types of government, federal government and state governments, we're very lucky, unlike the other countries in the other parts of the world. We still have an opportunity in the states to talk to our legislators and to educate them about this issue so they will vote the right way when these bills come up, and we can retain at least some degree of freedom in most of the states.
Well, you've been successful the last 2 years, and if you haven't been involved now, I plead with you to do this. The Vaccine Advocacy Portal, which is on NVIC.org, to participate. And the reason why I'm pleading with you now is because things are getting worse, and this is the bad part of the discussion, because Google has decided that you're telling fake news. So the ability of you to share your message with new people, and obviously, as you mentioned earlier, the media's cut you off. So it's really going to be incumbent upon us. And if you want the truth, you know, I think we need to start. We just not too recently wrote a really extensive article about how Google has been sanctioned in Europe and fined nearly $3 billion, or maybe more than $3 billion, for antitrust violations. And a similar effort went in the United States, but they were unable to because, just like Merck and the CDC, that's this whole thing. They planted people in there. It's this massive lobbying, and they were able to avoid any antitrust violations, even though they're the biggest monopoly in the history of the planet. So they are not letting people go to your site anymore. You can type it in, find it, but it'll be like on page 100. So, and that's intentional. That's because they want one right answer, and the right answer is that not to reconsider vaccines. So what can you do? What's the practical take-home? You can go to an alternate Google site. If you have Chrome, which is probably the most popular internet browser, you can go to an Chrome extension called DuckDuckGo, just like the duck, the bird. DuckDuckGo, all one word, and it's an alternative to Google that gives very relevant search results that Google used to but doesn't anymore, because now they've recategorized everything based on the fake news determination that they've made based on the right answer.
Is it duckduckgo.com?
Well, duckduckgo.com is the website, but DuckDuckGo is the name of the search engine.
I see.
Yeah, so and the extension that you would add in Google. And there's a DuckDuckSo, but it's Go. And I just actually noticed that this morning. That might be a Google plant to get you out, you know, to change things. But DuckDuckGo is, at this point in time, because there's always this temptation as these companies get more power and influence and revenues, that they get corrupted. And that's what happened with Google. I mean, they initially, I was a really huge fan. Google and I started about the same time. And of course, they were heavily financed, and they have a lot of connections. But their motto, as you know, is don't do evil, or don't do evil.
The founders were very
Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
Yeah.
Right, but things have changed,
yeah.
And they've changed considerably, and they seem to have some nefarious ends, especially in their light of embracing. They view themselves as an artificial intelligence company. And it's very clear if I'm sort of a tech geek, and I read the tech literature all the time. But most of the experts are thinking that there's a big discussion within the political community that even just recently, I think this week, as we're recording this, Putin made a statement that whichever country has the most AI is going to rule the world. So, and it may not be a country, it's probably going to be a corporation, and the two biggest candidates are Google and Facebook. And Skynet and the Terminator, many people believe could be Google. So, where they had this complete control, and largely through artificial intelligence. So there are some concerns here, and you need to stop using Google, because they really are. You have no privacy with Google. They're taking your information, targeting it. So stop using it, not only to get the correct information, but also to stop supporting them as a company.
Because they can track all your searches.
They do track. Not they can, they do.
Yeah.
They track, period. Forget the can. Exit that out, delete that from the...
So if you're a person of interest to the government,
Yeah.
and you have Google cooperating with the government, then that government knows what searches
Right.
and they can basically predict what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
so
a problem.
as a company at our Mercola, we really advise all of our employees to stay away from Google.
Oh.
Yeah. DuckDuckGo would be the way to go.
Well, you know, it can be overwhelming for people who listen to our conversation. Probably for some people who have just come into this issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I believe that we still have a chance,
Mm-hmm.
even though we're up against such enormous power. There are, what, 7 billion people on the planet.
We've got them running. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this.
They wouldn't be bringing out the hammer on the vaccine issue if they didn't know. They know already from surveys here in the United States that more than 90% of parents are worried about vaccine safety. And I would argue it's not just because of our organization.
No.
Okay,
no.
it's because of the personal experience
Mm-hmm.
of people when they go in to get these vaccines, adults as well as children. They're often coming out and within days or weeks becoming very sick. And they remember that. That's a very powerful experience.
And you're absolutely correct, because facts convey information.
Yes.
They motivate people a certain way. But human stories, testimonials, are orders of magnitude more effective, which is why this is working.
It's real.
It's real.
It's real experience.
It's not something that can be manipulated.
No. And I've always, you know, the mothers are most of the time the ones who take their children into doctors. That's been true forever.
Mm-hmm. It's just the way it is.
And mothers are the ones who have got this in their DNA. I know it's there. It's like, because that's the way
Mm-hmm.
that God intended us to have this inside of us, so that we will give our lives for our children. It's programmed into us. We are responsible for nurturing them until they can function on their own. And I believe that it will be the mothers across the world, and they are the ones who are by and large demonstrating in Italy, although thankfully the fathers are coming. This generation in 21st century, fathers have really stepped forward, and they're joining now. This is both parents who are joining, and that to me is like so exciting, because I do believe that we can turn this around, but we have to be awake, and we have to take action. And that's why thank you for encouraging people to get on our portal. We let everybody know what's going on in the country with vaccines and vaccine laws, and tell them how they can get involved. So thank you.
Well, you know, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, and if this thing goes, then your other freedoms go very shortly after that.
Exactly.
So if you are a fan of personal autonomy and freedom, then you'll want to be really active in this issue. And if you have any hope to see healthy future generations, this is one you want to take action on. And it really doesn't, it's not a lot of time, effort, and energy. I mean, yes, you can help support us, and we would definitely appreciate your support. And as we're doing this, you know, I match your support by, I don't know.
Every year you do
We
that.
do. I don't know if it's $1 or $2 or $3, or whatever it is, but we definitely, because I believe in this issue. I believe someone has to draw the line in the sand that they can't stop doing this, because if we don't, it's really going to be a nasty future for your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and it doesn't look pretty. I mean, some of the dystopian novels or movies that you see, you know, may come to fruition, actually. So be involved, stay active. You know, this is a crucial decision and action you can take.
Thank you.